Hello and welcome to Mains QIP Program 2020, a series of video lectures where we discuss the skill and art of answer writing from the questions which have been asked in the Mains test series. And in this video lecture, we are going to discuss the question which was asked in Polity and Governance test, and that was enlist the major differences between the federal and unitary system of governments by citing suitable examples. Do you agree that Indian Union has centralizing tendencies? The question is of 15 marks and it needs to be answered in 250 words. As far as this particular discussion is concerned, we are going to first understand that why this question has been chosen, laying special emphasis on past year questions as well as the syllabus. Then we are going to understand how to decode this particular question, mainly with respect to the parts and the subparts as well as the keywords of the question. Then we are also going to formulate a sample answer and we are going to review that answer. So let us first begin by understanding the relevance of this question from the perspective of syllabus of UPSC. So if you have read the syllabus of UPSC, you must have seen that in GS paper 2 there is a sentence which says features of Indian Constitution, and the federal structure is one of the basic features of Indian Constitution, and hence this particular question has been formulated. As far as past year question papers are concerned, in 2017 UPSC has asked examine the scope of fundamental rights in the light of the latest judgment of the Supreme Court on right to privacy. Similarly, almost every year a question with respect to main features of our constitution is asked, and for that static knowledge is required, and hence this question has been formulated. So let us now understand the decoding of the question. So if you read the question along, it starts by saying enlist the major differences between the federal and unitary system of governments by citing suitable example. So part 1 of the question is about enlisting, but you also have to enlist by giving suitable examples. And the second part is, do you agree that Indian Union has centralizing tendencies? And hence the second part asks us to express our views on the nature of Indian Union. So this question particularly has two parts. As far as the key terms are concerned, the first key term which appears in this question is enlist, which means that you have to list out and tabulate them. Then the second keyword is the comparison of federal and union along with examples. And third keyword is Indian Union has centralizing tendencies. So your final answer should have clearly laid out these two parts and their answers, as well as it should have these keywords addressed. So let us now start by discussing the answer structure. So the introduction should first address the definition of federal as well as unitary. The body part should address the major differences between federal and unitary system of government, along with addressing the main question of the second part, which is India's union has a centralizing tendencies? And finally, the conclusion should demonstrate that what are the checks which act to keep the centralizing tendencies into the limits. So let us now discuss the sample answer. So the question is, enlist the major differences between the federal and unitary system of governments by citing suitable examples. Do you agree that Indian Union has centralizing tendencies? So the introduction starts by, a federal system of government is the one that constitutionally divides the powers of the government between the national or the federal government and state and local governments. So here you have to focus on one aspect, that is a constitutional division of powers. So one way to rule a territory is that you create one capital and vest this capital with all the powers. And if this capital thinks that it is important for it to delegate some of its powers to the local regions, then it might delegate, but that delegation of power is not constitutional, and hence this will not be considered as a federal body. To give you an example, let's say in case of India, central government has all the powers. It can legislate on any matter, it can give out any order, any executive order. But for the matter of convenience, central government says that all the state governments will have these powers. Will that be called a federal structure? No. That will not be called a federal structure, because since central has given this power, it can always take it back at the moment it wants. What makes India a federal structure is the fact that our constitution delegates power to center and state. Neither center can take powers of state, and of course state cannot take power of center. And hence this is a federal structure. So the introduction says, a federal system of government is one that constitutionally divides the powers of government between the national and the state governments. It is seen as a way to integrate a diverse population consisting of multiple ethnicities, religion, lingual groups without any of them fearing the domination of a center and a strong center. So now you need to understand that why these federations are created. So for example, there are a lot of matters which can be taken care by the center, and it is important that those matters should be taken care of by the center. For example, military defense, telecommunication, foreign policy. So all these matters are such which require the engagement and activity of the top level of the government. But certain things are better if taken care of at the local level. For example, the schooling system. So of course, the requirement of Northeast and the Southern India will be different. And hence, it is important that the education policy be taken care of by these local governments, because they are better suited to judge the local requirement. And hence, various powers are delegated or even shared by the center and the state, so that none of them feel the domination of one center. So now start the body part. And since we have already seen that it asks us to enlist, so we have enlisted. Major differences between the federal and unitary system of government. So the federal system of government has mandatory dual government, national and regional, along with clear-cut constitutional separation of power, as we have understood. If the separation of power is not mentioned in the constitution of a nation, then it is not a federal structure. And that is the difference between India and China. Both have regional governments, both have state governments, both also have local governments. But in case of China, the dual government is not constitutionally given the power. So the dual government may or may not exist, but all powers are vested in the national governments, and hence the best example of that would be China. So the next point is that a written constitution is a must, along with supremacy of the constitution. Now here there are two terms. You might ask or wonder that what do you mean by written constitution? The constitution has to be written, but that is not the fact. Many countries do not have a written constitution, but they consider a set of laws passed by the parliament as their own constitution, and the best example of that would be UK. And the second term is supremacy of the constitution. Now the supremacy of the constitution means that whatever happens in that country is determined by the constitution. There are various countries where the parliament is supreme. Whatever law parliament makes in those countries cannot be challenged. But there are a lot of countries, for example India, where the constitution is supreme and parliament has to act in accordance with the constitution of India. Now this is done to ensure that parliament never infringes upon the rights of the states. And hence it is important that the supreme authority be laid out in the constitution and not in the Senate or Congress or the Parliament. Whereas in case of unitary, the constitution may or may not be written, and constitution may or may not be supreme, it is not important. And hence the best example would be Britain in this case, and US and India in the case of federal structure. Now the next difference is about the independence of the judiciary, which is very, very important. Now independence of judiciary in this case is required to ensure that again the powers given to the states is not infringed upon. For example, let's say if Parliament makes a law which infringes upon the powers of states. States can challenge that law in the Supreme Court of India and get them cancelled. So to protect the interests of the states, it is very important that the judiciary is independent of the executive as well as the Parliament. But in case of unitary, it is good if the judiciary is independent, but it is not a basic requirement or a mandatory condition. And finally, last but not the least, is the existence of a bicameral legislature. As you know that in case of both USA and India, we have two houses of parliament. One is called the lower house or the House of Representative, as the case may be, and then another one is called upper house, Rajya Sabha, or the Senate. We know that for any ordinary law to be passed, it has to be approved by both the houses. But one of these houses is a representative of the states. Now this is done to ensure the representation and the will of the states even at the central level. In that way, the will of the states is also ensured. But in case of unitary system of government, it is not important that the parliament or the legislature may be bicameral, because if you have not given the power to the regional units, and if you have given them, you have not constitutionally given them, it is not important for you to take their views. But in case of federal structure, it is very, very important. So the first part has been addressed. Now moving on to the second part, centralizing tendencies of Indian Union. First and foremost, Parliament has a huge dominance in legislative matters because the Union list is much larger than the state list given in the 7th schedule. Now it's your job to find out that how many items are there in the Union list, whereas how many items are there in the state list. Then of course we know that center has overriding powers in the matters of concurrent list. So for example, if state has made a law in the concurrent list, but if center makes the law in the same list, then the provisions of the parliamentary law will take precedence over the state law. And also the residuary powers have been given to the center. So all those items which have not been mentioned in either of the three lists of the 7th schedule, center has the power to make laws in those. Then we know that the basic constituents of federal structure are the state, but the power to reorganize that state, change the areas of those state, change the boundaries and the names of those states has been unilaterally given to the parliament, and states do not have any control over it. Then of course the institution of governor is a big challenge to our federal structure, because she is appointed by the president and designed to act as an agent of the center and has a huge discretionary powers. And hence almost all the commissions dealing with the center-state relations have indicated or recommended some kind of modification in the post of the governor and its powers. Then of course we have emergency provisions, which once applied converts the federal structure into unitary system without any amendment of constitution. And hence moving on to the conclusion. So if the question is enlist the differences between the federal and unitary system of governments by citing suitable examples, do you agree that Indian Union has centralizing tendencies? There can be a lot of conclusions for this particular answer. But in this case, it is best suited if we show that although Indian Union has centralizing tendencies, but there are few checks. What are those checks? Those are various kinds of judicial pronouncements given by the Supreme Court, and the most noted one is SR Bommai case, which stated that the federal structure is the part of a basic structure of our constitution. So any kind of encroachment upon the rights of the states will not be tolerated. Also, you know that regional aspirations have a very big role to play in the way federal structure works. For example, although Parliament has unilateral powers to change the area of a state, but do you think that today the Parliament can change area of any state if it wants to? It cannot, because the people of the state will simply not allow the central government to change the areas. So the Indian federal structure has a very strong center, because of which many thinkers have categorized India as quasi-federal system. Despite these, judicial pronouncements, civic movements, and increasing sense of regional identities have ensured that the effective functioning of Indian Union remains federalist in nature. So now it's time for us to review our own sample answer. How well is the answer presented? As far as the structure of the answer is concerned, the intro of the question explained federal as well as unitary. Then the body part of the question enlisted the difference between unitary and federal, as well as the centralizing tendency of the union. And finally, the conclusion part demonstrated the checks. So the answer structure is complete. Then the presentation of the answer used subheadings, especially the use of table format. Now here you should focus that the table format is utilized and it is most preferable while showing the differences between any two kinds of concepts or ideas. So you should also practice for using tabular form in mains answer writing practice. The language of the answer was simple and it was grammatically correct, and the answer was within the word limit of 275 words.